Imagine spending years of your life working on a project. You show up every day. You solve real problems. You're proud of the work. And only decades later, do you find out that you never actually knew what you were building. This isn't a hypothetical. It's happened before, more than once, in programs so compartmentalized that even the scientists inside them were only given one small piece of a much larger picture. This is the story of how secrecy, taken far enough, can hide the truth, not just from the public, but from the very people doing the work. Stay with me until the end, because the most unsettling part of this story isn't what the government hid from the public. It's what they hid from their own scientists. Let's start with how a program like this actually works. In large-scale government research projects, especially the kind classified at the highest levels, there's a principle that shapes almost everything: compartmentalization. The idea is simple enough. Instead of letting everyone involved understand the full scope of a project, information gets split into small, isolated pieces. Each team, each scientist, each engineer only receives exactly what they need to complete their specific task. Nothing more. On paper, this makes sense. It limits the number of people who could leak sensitive information. It protects the project from espionage. It's a security measure, not a conspiracy. But here's where it gets uncomfortable. Compartmentalization doesn't just limit what outsiders know. It limits what insiders know, too. A scientist working on one small piece of a project can spend years contributing meaningfully to something without ever being told what that something actually is, or what it's ultimately for. Think about what that actually looks like in practice. One team might spend years perfecting a single component, a material, a mechanism, a calculation, without ever seeing how that piece connects to anything larger. They're told it's for a specific, narrow purpose. They have no reason to doubt that, because questioning it isn't part of the job. And in some cases, asking too many questions could get a person removed from the project entirely. No explanation given. The system isn't built to reward curiosity about the bigger picture. It's built to reward precision within a very small, clearly defined box. Some of the people working inside these programs believed they were contributing to purely defensive research. Others believed they were working on projects with entirely different applications than the ones actually being pursued. They weren't being lazy or incurious. They were simply never given enough information to know otherwise. By design. Let's sit with that for a moment. These weren't uninformed members of the public. These were the experts. The very people whose knowledge and skill made the project possible in the first place. And even they were kept in the dark, not through incompetence, but through a deliberate system built specifically to keep the full picture from ever coming together in any one person's mind. It's worth asking, who, if anyone, actually held the complete picture? In most documented cases, the answer is a surprisingly small number of people. Sometimes just a handful of senior officials at the very top of the chain, the only ones with legal authority and security clearance to see how every compartment connected to every other. Everyone below them, no matter how senior, no matter how brilliant, worked with an incomplete map. The full picture existed. It just existed nowhere, except in the minds of a few people who had no obligation, and often no intention, of ever sharing it further than necessary. So how does something like this eventually come to light? In most documented cases, it isn't through a whistleblower stepping forward, and it isn't through investigative journalism uncovering a hidden document. It's almost always slower and stranger than that. Decades pass. Classification periods expire. Documents that were sealed for 50, 60, sometimes 70 years become eligible for declassification. Sometimes automatically. Sometimes only after formal requests filed by historians or family members trying to piece together what a relative had actually spent their career doing. When those documents are finally opened, historians often find something unsettling. Internal memos where officials explicitly discuss how much information different teams should be allowed to have. Not what would help the project succeed. What would keep any single scientist from understanding the whole. For historians studying these programs, one detail comes up again and again in the declassified paperwork. The operating assumption wasn't just that outsiders were a security risk, It was that the scientists themselves, if they understood the full picture, might raise ethical objections that could slow the project down or stop it entirely. Secrecy, in other words, wasn't only about protecting information from enemies. It was about protecting the project from the very people whose expertise made it possible, in case their conscience got in the way. That detail changes how you have to think about the whole structure. This wasn't simply about keeping secrets from an outside enemy. In some documented cases, the people being managed most carefully weren't foreign spies at all. They were the very scientists holding security badges, walking through the front door every morning, fully trusted with the technical work, and fully distrusted with the moral question of what that work was actually for. That's the part of this story that tends to stay with people the longest. We tend to assume that expertise and awareness go hand in hand, that if you're skilled enough to work on something, you must understand what it is. These programs prove that assumption wrong. Skill and awareness can be deliberately separated, and when they are, the people doing the most sensitive work can end up being some of the least informed people in the entire chain. Consider what this means for the individuals involved. Decades later, when documents are finally declassified, some of these scientists, by then elderly, some no longer alive, or their families, learn for the first time what they had actually contributed to. Imagine spending your career believing you helped build one thing, only to learn near the end of your life that the true purpose was something else entirely. Historians who study these declassification waves describe a common reaction among surviving participants, not outrage, but a quiet, complicated grief, a sense of having been used by a system they trusted, without ever being given the chance to decide for themselves whether they wanted to be part of what they were actually building. There's another layer to this worth mentioning. Some historians who have interviewed surviving participants describe a specific kind of unease that comes up again and again. Not just regret about the work itself, but a deeper discomfort with realizing how easily their trust had been used as a tool. These were, in many cases, people who considered themselves careful, rational, skeptical by training. Scientists whose entire profession was built around questioning assumptions and demanding evidence. And yet, within a system engineered specifically to control what they could question in the first place, the training simply had nowhere to apply itself. You cannot investigate what you don't know exists. This raises an uncomfortable question that's worth sitting with. If it happened before, documented, declassified, confirmed by historians using the government's own paperwork, how confident can we be that it isn't happening again, right now, in some other compartmentalized program we won't fully understand for another 50 years? Nobody outside those programs can answer that with certainty, and that uncertainty is exactly what makes stories like this worth telling. Because here's the thing about secrecy at this scale. It doesn't just hide information from the public, it changes what's possible to know for anyone, including the very experts building it. And when a program is designed well enough, that fact might not become clear until every single person who lived through it is gone, leaving only fragments in a declassified file for someone to piece together generations later. It's tempting to imagine that transparency naturally increases over time, that eventually everything gets declassified, every gap gets filled, every question gets answered, but that assumes someone, somewhere, is still around to ask the right question, and that the paperwork survives long enough to answer it. Some documents are declassified only because a specific researcher happened to file the right request at the right time. Others may simply sit, technically available, in an archive nobody has ever thought to search. Not hidden anymore, but never quite found either. Maybe that's what makes this kind of story worth telling, not because it confirms some dramatic conspiracy, but because it reveals something quieter and more uncomfortable. That even the smartest, most capable people in the room can be working towards something they don't fully understand. Not because they failed to ask questions, but because the entire system around them was built to make sure the full answer never reached any single person. If a story like this makes you think differently about how much of what we consider known history might still be sitting in a classified file somewhere, that's exactly what this channel is here for. Every week, we dig into the stories history left in the shadows, the ones that reveal something uncomfortable, surprising, or overlooked about who we really are. If this is the kind of story you want more of, let me know in the comments. And if you've ever come across a declassified program that surprised you, I'd genuinely like to hear about it. Subscribe to the Untold archive. The truth is always waiting in the file.